So the topic of the session is blockchain 2020. So we're looking 2020 should mean a lot more than it does now, but
okay, hi, I'm Aleks I'm right now, but I'm CEO of XBTerminal company. We're doing the POS systems for Bitcoin. We've actually been in a space for a while. We work in the UK, so in the UK this thing isn't that easy. We've been struggling, we've been working with banks and with usually happens in the UK and always some problems, but still we're here. Essentially supposed to not me be on this chair, but another guy in my company, but he suddenly flew away to China, so I had to replace him. I'm a tech guy in there, so I probably can talk more on the tech side of blockchain, well, business side of blockchain, but that's it.
Hello everyone, I'm George Hallam, Business and Partnership Director at Ethereum. Before Ethereum, I was working in the oil and gas industry, originally out of Nigeria, doing ministerial policy and sort of local content. Now my role sees me sort of reaching out to the community, assisting them building smart contracts, building decentralized applications on top of Ethereum. Also spoken to quite a few people in this room before in terms of leveraging Ethereum's technological stack to do what we need to do.
My name is Marc Warne. I'm the founder of a company called Bittylicious. It tries to solve the should be easy problem of how do you buy a Bitcoin and how do you sell a Bitcoin. It's 2 years old and it's done about £13 million worth of fiat have really gone through and been converted to Bitcoins. So it's quite popular in the UK, getting a bit popular in Europe, and it's actually really quite difficult to marry banks and credit cards and Bitcoins. They're a little bit different from each other. It's a fun challenge.
My name is Jon Matonis. I'm one of the founding directors for the Bitcoin Foundation. Right now I'm helping Bitcoin startups evolve in the marketplace. My background is also in banking. I've been with Sumitomo Bank as a derivatives trader, and I was also the foreign exchange trader for Visa International.
Well, I'm supposed to moderate it, but I was just told that I'm sitting here and talking also, which is kind of weird. Where we're doing that, but that's part of it. Actually, John, I wanted to revert your question back to all of us about the endgame. Like 2020 is 5 years from now. 5 years ago, there was nothing like this. It was a very small company involved discussing some weird stuff. Now it's a big industry. Do you think in 2020 we will see not the endgame of blockchain as a whole thing, but it won't be a cool thing anymore, it will be anything, or will we stay there?
Well, thank you, moderator. We have to remember that a blockchain is really just a ledger. It's a fancy name for a ledger. What's important is how we choose to secure the ledger. And I want to let people here in on a little secret, because this is called Blockchain Conference, or London Blockchain Conference. And I like the work that Lewis is doing. I think Barclays Accelerator is great. But the reality is that if it wasn't called the Blockchain Conference and it was called the Bitcoin Conference, you wouldn't have so many bankers coming here. So it's a little bit of a wordplay where Bitcoin has had a bad reputation in the press. So everybody has said subconsciously, let's all shift into blockchain and we'll be able to expand this technology more. I urge you not to fall for that, because the security behind the Bitcoin blockchain is really what the differentiating factor is. And 2020 is a long way away in Bitcoin blockchain time. So the premise that I want to start out with on the panel here, and obviously open up for discussion, is that the Bitcoin blockchain allows you to have a single version of the truth. Multiple blockchains attempt to have multiple versions of the truth. And that doesn't really change much from the current paradigm. And when we're talking about permissionless ledgers, such as the Bitcoin blockchain, you have to have the native token be something that has extraordinary value to allow the security to to be at a level to allow transactions. So let's not confuse private blockchains and public blockchains. They share the word blockchain, but where they differ is in the native token, the underlying native token that they use for the security of that blockchain. And I think that Everledger, in their presentation, did a good job of pointing out the differences of why they use the public blockchain for one thing and a private blockchain for something else. So I think we should expand on that.
Absolutely, let me nail on the head, I absolutely agree. So blockchains the blockchain technology is really solving a really difficult old computer science problem, which is how to get consensus on an untrusted network. This people basically gave up 5 years ago until Satoshi came and figured it out. So that's a huge technological wonder. Putting the token on, i.e. the Bitcoin side of it, is an economic genius. It just works. He's thought about all the economics, thought about how to make it incentivizing, how to solve security issues, all this kind of stuff. And putting these two together is what's made Bitcoin what it is. So they're both extremely important. And yeah, we mustn't forget, it's Bitcoin that got us to this stage so far, and solving the financial issues is a big thing. When it comes to actually blockchains, without the security, without the economics, then I think more on the private side or even the semi-private side is, it could work. But when you're having it out there in the public, you've kind of got to come up with some other solution. And this seems to work. It actually gets people involved, and people, if you rely on economics and if you rely on green people, which is what Bitcoin does, then you can have a sustaining system.
For me, I think in 2020, a defining feature of where the blockchain space will be, it all comes down to scalability. Scalability is a massive issue in the blockchain space right now, and I think people kind of want to talk about it, but currently Bitcoin does 7 transactions per second. We kind of reach 20 transactions per second on the Ethereum network, but that's not great, right? We use this doing 100,000 transactions per second, et cetera, et cetera. So as the technology,
so Visa are doing 100,000 auths per second.
Auths per second.
But settlement is a different thing entirely, and maybe we could pick that up as a second question.
Sure, so but regardless of, in terms of the volume of transactions that needs to be going through the system, blockchain technology is just not there on its own. There's no single blockchain that can possibly cater for all the needs and requirements that are being talked about in the postulated. So in that respect, I think it's going to be a massive fracture of the space. I think as a short-term scalability solution, we're going to see a lot of various different blockchains with different rule sets how to communicate with each other in different ways. I think Bitcoin will have a large place in the future. I think it's always going to remain as a great store of value. It's just a question of whether it can have sort of an additional sort of source added to it to give it greater utility in the space, whether it can start to interact with smart contracts, that sort of thing. It also comes down to a lot of politics as well. Politics is a very big thing in the space. You have a lot of different stakeholders, you have the miners, you have people who are building businesses on top of blockchains. And if you get the game theory wrong, then you can have serious issues where the miners are in control and the blockchain is not able to evolve to its requirements, to what's needed. All of these sort of things are very much going to factor onto how the space looks. I guess we can talk about that in a little bit more detail as we go through.
Yes, this scalability issue is actually something that is going to either be solved or will probably not kill the blockchain as a whole, but will seriously affect the Bitcoin. Bitcoin will get even more bad publicity. That's what going to happen if this will not be solved. Because there are issues right now. There is lots of tech talk and tech developers talk about how to solve this problem. And if it's the Bitcoin is actually growing and growing quite fast. And we are approaching a place in time where it could become a problem for usual people to just be not able to use Bitcoin as they used to use. They are already used to using it, and it suddenly stops working. But yes, the game theory has to be very carefully considered here, because on the one hand, we can easily scale up, make the blockchain bigger, make the blocks bigger, make it consume more transactions, and it will kind of work. But the blockchain as a concept, as a whole thing that made this wonderful solution, is distributed, and it has to stay distributed, otherwise it will become a private blockchain, a sort of private blockchain, and will not be the solution it used to be, just because it will lose this subtle thing of being distributed. Right now there is about 6 to 7,000 full nodes of Bitcoin running, Bitcoin client running. So there are 6 to 7,000 people around the world being able to tell, well, their computers being able to tell that yes, these transactions happen, and yes, these transactions are true, and those transactions are not true, and tell them apart. If we trying to scale this up and make it work for more and more people, there will be less and less and less people able to sustain this sort of load and fund these usual computers. Right now it's usual computers, usual people's desktops that run this thing. It's still possible. But we'll see this either we'll have to migrate from the desktop computers running Bitcoin blockchain, or we'll have to find a solution to scale it up without losing that. Actually, we'll have to find a solution, otherwise Bitcoin itself will not fail, but it will lose one of these key things that it has, the actual distribution.
Well, to address Simon's point, though, I mean, yeah, centralized systems are definitely going to be a lot more adept at handling those volumes and scale. Centralized systems are going to be a more efficient way to do it, of course. But let's be honest. I mean, a centralized system is really what a private blockchain is like. So when you get into the decentralized blockchains, it gets messy. And Bitcoin proof of work and Bitcoin scalability is messy. There's no doubt about it, but that's because it's decentralized. That's the price you pay for decentralization. The strength of the network is currently at 350,000 terahashes per second, which is massive. I mean, it blows away any kind of anything that's even close to it in terms of distributed systems or supercomputer computational power. And that's what's required to replicate and emulate a SWIFT or a Visa or Amex processing data center. That's why you put the money behind. That's why the Bitcoin miners put the money behind that, is because they're rewarded, but you need that computational strength to take on that type of a challenge. And one more thing that I just want to close with is that it's really the difference between public and private blockchains is the difference between open systems and the potential to have cartels. And to illustrate this, let me give you an analogy. If you had a SWIFT get together and launch a private blockchain from any one of these blockchain companies, you would have the validators from SWIFT all get in together, and they would say, we're going to have this be the SWIFT private blockchain. It's not going to be any different than the current SWIFT system, because it's just going to be a replication of the cartel. So the same problems that people see with SWIFT, the ability to censor transactions, lock people out, is not going to be any different. So to get beyond the cartelization of finance and validating, you have to go to an open source distributed model.
But what if there's data that people can't show on an open ledger? What if they want to have operations that are not able to be shown to the public?
They can use a centralized database.
How to record the transactions on the blockchain, right? Because the transactions have to be done with some level of security, and shouldn't just be shared with the public in general.
No, the transactions are shared. I mean, the transactions aren't shared, but the transactions are on an open ledger. You're able to see the processing on the blockchain.
Well, that's my point. So if you have something which is maybe using smart contracts or something like that, we have additional information with the KYC and ML, things that we don't want to share with everyone else, then
I think Ethereum is going to be an excellent sidechain.
I've actually got two questions. So first of all, to Jon, you mentioned a lot at the outset around Bitcoin and the word Bitcoin being, quite toxic. Do you think if the Bitcoin Foundation had been run more effectively, then the industry would be in that position than it is now? And my second question to George, in regards to 2020, will Ethereum be released by 2020?
You want to start and answer that first?
So yeah, I mean, we've finished the first security audit is done. We're going to be releasing the results of that at the end of this week, hopefully. We're currently finalizing on the second technical security audit, which will be done by the end of this month, based on the results of that second technical security audit. Which finishes at the end of June. We'll be launching in the weeks following that. So depending on the information, I would say. Yeah, we're actually doing that. But yeah, I think it's very soon.
This year?
This year is.
And in terms of Bitcoin being toxic, I mean, I don't think any one entity or person has control over what the media decides to latch onto. What's happened is, just like the media with any topic, they like the salacious, they like what gets readers, and of course focusing on some of those bits of Bitcoin is actually going to help them sell newspapers, sell magazines, and sell writing. So I don't think that. I think you just have to demonstrate through example the positive uses. It's not going to happen with a flashy PR strategy. People are too smart.
People forget value as well. The Silk Road is becoming less mentioned in the media. Sorry to bring up again. But people will start forgetting these things. And when there has been a period of not too many big incidents, and hopefully there'll be fewer incidents as well. People know how to do these things properly. Not how to do darknet properly, but know how to use Bitcoin in a
well, exactly. I think smart people also realize that it's part of the growing phase. A lot of people don't realize it, but when PayPal went public, the day they went public, 70% of their transaction volume was for adult entertainment and gambling. And those industries are the first to experiment, but you eventually move mainstream.
But that was kind of my point. So that was, for me, what Bitcoin Foundation was supposed to do. It was supposed to improve the recognition of solid use cases for Bitcoin, and it was quite effective at doing that. And it was kind of a bit of a train wreck, which actually added more negative PR to Bitcoin than positive.
Well, it's still early days. I mean, you're looking at it like you think it's over. I mean, we're still like in 1993 for the explosion of the web.
I'm talking specifically about Bitcoin Foundation, not Bitcoin. So Bitcoin Foundation's responsibility was to try and improve the image of Bitcoin, but it didn't. So would you say that it was
well, that was one of their responsibilities, but you can't. I mean, the Bitcoin Foundation can't take responsibility for for all of the actors and participants in the Bitcoin ecosystem. I mean, we didn't. We're not responsible for Silk Road.
On the previous panel, the gentleman described the community behind Bitcoin as the biggest supercomputer as coming forward. Do you agree with that? And if so, as the head of the Bitcoin Foundation, what are the other use cases you see for this supercomputer?
Other use cases for supercomputers?
For the terahashing, so that the security.
Those that you've just described. My question is, do you see a single use case, which is the support of the Bitcoin with a lower community, or are you seeing other use cases for your supercomputer?
Obviously, there's going to be other cases, but I think it's very premature to start looking at Bitcoin 2.0. I mean, we're still in the early to middle stages of Bitcoin 1.0. A lot of people, around the world, and even in the audience, haven't come to terms with Bitcoin 1.0. And I think people have this inclination to just jump to the next best thing and say, let's go to blockchain 2.0 or Bitcoin 2.0 because then it's something new and then you'll immediately forget the old. But we're still very early days. I try to stay away from 2.0 topics. I know the applications are there. I know who's working on them. But we have to do a much better job at making the case even for the primary Bitcoin 1.0 and the Bitcoin blockchain, in my opinion.
For me, proof of work, it's a one-way street. We're going to end up in this sort of computational radiator phase where it becomes economically viable to have Bitcoin miners in your heaters. Like it's not something which is it can't continue. There needs to be a more efficient mechanism. As you said, I think it's like 5 times the current power of the top 500 supercomputers is currently pointed at the Bitcoin network. And as you made your point, it's not like these are computers that can be used to do other stuff. They literally are ASIC chips. They can do one computation only. So there is no other use case for those chips for the tens of millions of dollars of capital going into these miners. They're just going to keep on mining Bitcoin. Now Ethereum, we're going to launch proof of work at the beginning, simply because no one has really, in our opinion, solved proof of stake. Proof of stake is, instead of basically staking computational power, you stake a deposit and you lose the deposit if you vote on the blockchain. With Ethereum, we intend to switch to proof of stake about 9 months to a year after we launch it. You don't have the same waste of computational power.
Well, I would say that actually this diamond startup is an example of another use case for the blockchain, or for Bitcoin blockchain, and for all the computational power behind the Bitcoin blockchain. Because the computational power is the thing that makes it secure. take it away, and Bitcoin blockchain was not, because everybody can attack it in 1%. And there are lots of people trying to leverage that instead of starting their own blockchains. Okay, there are things like Ethereum that actually will do other blockchains specifically designed to program on top of it, do other stuff on top of it outside of just money. But it can be done on the Bitcoin blockchain itself also, and it is done. And this one is just one of the examples. No.
Yeah, true. In the whole point of Bitcoin is this massive supercomputer that's basically a boring supercomputer doing this one thing can store just 40 characters per transaction. And in that transaction, you can do a hash of anything, it could be any color coin on top. So it's kind of dull, really, looking to the computer side of it, but what it represents can be quite big, and it's incredibly powerful. You can't really challenge it. Things may change when hopefully Ethereum does actually have a lot of power on its own, also during proof of work days. Certainly, I mean, it's not a given that these ASICs are actually going to be lasting, who knows, even a year. But
Yes.
Guys, final thoughts. Blockchain 2040.
2040. I think in 2040 we will be expanding the number of decimal spaces to the right of the decimal point. So instead of 8, we will probably be at 16 plus. That 2040 we will have 99.5% of all the Bitcoins issued by 2040. So we will be migrating to transaction fees to sustain the network, and there will be a robust transaction fee market that develops hopefully 10 years, 20 years leading up to that.
I'm very pro Bitcoin, but the reality is, most fiat currencies actually don't last that long. You're talking decades. Bitcoin is something hugely amazing, and it is really good. And even lasting so far, for 5 years already, is pretty impressive. I can see it lasting for quite a while longer, but I can't promise 2040. Personally, I'd like to see Bitcoin 9.0 taking over at that point, or at least Ethereum, something a bit more all-encompassing. This is asking the printing press people how they envisage communicating with people on the other side of the world, and then the internet came along out of nowhere. Who knows?
But everyone will have a Bittylicious account.
Oh, everyone, yeah. Well, global domination about that.
I think 2040 will be obviously incredibly interesting. Doubly so, it's 2020. It's
Ethereum 1.1.
So hopefully by then we'll have things like snarks, having more encryption, so you'll start like lessening the need of having private blockchains where you'll be able to put basically private data on an open ledger and have computations run on an open ledger using private data. So that'd be really, really interesting. I also want to shoehorn on this question into use cases as well, because we haven't really had a chance to talk about that too much. But I think supply chains is going to be really big, like the whole Everledger thing. Blockchains are going to be great for bringing provenance to provenance, if that makes sense. So I think that's probably going to be one of the biggest use cases of smart contracts and stuff. Blockchains moving forward is tracking everything and removing that sort of that element of doubt when interacting with systems against these. I mean, if everything on a blockchain, then not only can you know your customer, you can know your customer's customer's customer. And you can infer a lot of data from that. So I think that's going to be very interesting.
Yes, and I think we'll see actually, we cannot even imagine right now what sort of things can change completely if you bring the blockchain into the equation. And right now, by 2040, I think we'll just see most of the services we're using right now as centralized services. We'll see them either run on a private blockchain, which will completely change their own internal economies and make it much cheaper to run for them and make it much cheaper to use for us. Or we'll see just business models changing again completely because some services become obsolete because there is a distributed service that costs completely nothing and doesn't hold anybody's data and doesn't need anybody to run, but just works. So I guess we'll see lots of more distributed corporations in that sense that nobody owns, but everybody uses.
One last question, if I may, because with the current hot private versus public blockchains, I have many different views on the topic, but to my mind, a private blockchain is a centralized but distributed ledger let's say Alice and Bob have a spreadsheet that they track whatever they do to track. But it's sort of a spreadsheet, but it's still centralized. Distributed, yes, more robust, yes, but still centralized. Then you have the decentralized distributed ledgers that are with the public. So this is, to my mind, how it works. And I would be curious, what are your thoughts? Because many people think those two are equivalent. This one is public and one is private. To my mind, they are actually very, very different.
Right, they're so different, they should have different conferences. So the private databases should be at the, the MySQL Oracle conferences. And because it's not enabling anything that bypasses current infrastructure. It doesn't allow for anything that's permissionless, and that's a major differentiator. You talked about the proof of work and the algorithm behind the proof of work. Of course, it's a massive, inefficient waste of resources. It's sad that we need it, but the reason you do need it is because you need to be immune from shutdown. You need to be immune from shutdown, including shutdown from state actors.
Thank you.